This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. The music you hear in the background is provided by Jeff Brisbane, and the music is called Enough. I Wish You Enough. And that's what I wish for all of our listeners here on Avoid the Maze, because I invite guests on here who have a story to tell, share their life. And as I've said on many of our programs, you know what? I wake up in the morning and I really think I know who I am, what I'm going to do, and how the day is going to go. But I don't know about the rest of you, but my day, it's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon as I'm recording. I got up at 5 a.m. this morning, and not one thing has happened the way I believed it would. But you know what? That's what life is about. You walk down the path, you see a fork in the road, and you choose, do I go right? Do I go left? Or do I go straight into that tree? Well, I hope we don't bump into the tree, but today my guest is, and I hope I don't mess up your name, Bob DiPasquale.
Di Pasquale. That was very good.
DiPasquale.
That was
Okay.
very good.
Wasn't sure if the E was, silent or not. And before we came online, Bob and I were talking about that. He was born in New York, a crazy, wonderful place to live, visit. But then
Mhm.
his family moved to Southern Florida. And back in the day, it probably was just like a nice, calm area. But like everything,
Mhm.
we're just growing so fast and nothing really stays the same. And in some ways, I think that's really, really good. But in Bob's case, you talk about in your bio about your resilience and
Mhm.
learning from your struggles. And I don't think you're alone in that, but tell us what that means to you. I mean, some people, when they have struggles, they just want to push them under the carpet and never think about them again.
Karen, that is a great way to start the conversation because you mentioned about the day that you've had. We're 11 hours into your day, mine as well. I'm also on the East Coast here, woke up at 5 a.m. And there have been a lot of things that have not gone as planned. And so it's a good thing I've learned to be resilient, or I might be sitting in a hole in the closet or something right now, cowering in the corner. But so
Absolutely.
resiliency is very, very important in my life. And I think it's important in everyone's life. It just depends on how you use it and how you react to it, right? Resiliency is really a reaction to something that's happened, and that thing that's happened is a result. And what I mean, and I mean that, I mean to stress that because a lot of times we focus on results instead of the inputs that may or may not lead to those results. Sometimes there's things in life that just happen that we are not able to control. And letting go of that control is extremely important. So, in some crazy way, maybe, I don't know the psychology behind this, I'm not a psychologist, but resiliency actually deals with letting go of control. Because when you're resilient, you're able to bounce back and respond well, react well to things that have happened, whether you caused them to happen or not. And in my life, I've had a lot of things that I've caused and messed up on my own. But there's also a few cards and hands that I've been dealt that weren't my fault. But you know what? I can't classify those. I can't try to put them in different places and respond differently. I have to learn how to respond in a positive way. And I believe resiliency is that positive response.
And what is interesting is that when we go through these struggles that we did not bring on our own, whether it be Mother Nature, so to speak, or the person next door, um, we always think because we are these smart human beings that we should have an answer for everything. And we should be able to
Mhm.
fix everything. And the reality is, no, we can't fix everything. Some things are just going to be the way they are. Um,
Mhm.
so, there's a saying, about being responsible for only the things that you have control over.
Mhm.
But sometimes we think when it comes to our health, well, I have control over this. I've been doing all the right things, eating the right foods, exercising, whatever. And then we get ill. And we sit there going, but this isn't fair. I did all the right things. How can this happen to me? How do you become resilient and say, hey, I'm going to bounce through this? I'm not going to have that black cloud hang over my head.
Well, I don't know how much time we have, but I have a story related to illness.
Absolutely.
So I can share the story. Let me give you a short answer to your question quickly, so I can address that, and then maybe the story will kind of circle back. But the short answer to that is, first of all, you have to do the things that you know that you can do, especially in times of physical illness. You have to do the things that you know that you need to do and can do, that either doctors or professionals or other people recommend that you do. Obviously, those you can control, but some of those things you are unable to control. And in those scenarios, you have to rely on other people and other forces and other things that you can trust in the world. And when it ultimately comes down to it, I think faith is an important part of it for people. But if you're grounded in those things, I think it's a lot easier to understand that there are things that are out of your control, and sometimes you're dealt things that maybe you don't desire, but they're ultimately better for you in the long run. And I know that my battle with illness was something that I would never wish on anyone, but it's something that ultimately did make me stronger. And it's a cliche, but they say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think I do believe in that, because I've seen it in my life. So we've mentioned my illness a couple of times. So about 21 years ago now, it's hard to believe it's been that long. But I was a freshman, a rising freshman at Hofstra University in Long Island, New York. Now, we mentioned that my parents moved from New York down to Florida when I was a kid. And I always wanted to kind of go away to college. I loved growing up in South Florida in a melting pot down here. You're right, it wasn't quite as busy and hustle bustle about 15, 20 miles west of Fort Lauderdale, where I still live now and where I grew up. And it's a lot different now, but I did want to spread my wings a little bit. So I was going to go back up to New York, go to college, play football, be this invincible. I don't know about you, but when I was 18, I thought I was going to be invincible. I thought I was invincible, right? Nothing could take me down. I mean, I wasn't a dumb kid, but I pretty much thought that I couldn't be destroyed. And so I was going to go spend time with my family, get an education. Maybe that was secondary, play football. There were some things that were important in my life at that point. And so within the first couple of days of training camp, now high school training camp is 2 days. It lasts for a couple of weeks. It's one thing. But when you get to college, it's a different experience. I mean, you're there for a month. A lot of people are living on their own for the first time ever in their life, in a strange place, and you're spending, talk about getting up at 5 a.m. I've had a pretty exhausting day, to be honest with you, but nothing is more exhausting than college training camp, and especially before they came out with some of the new rules. So anyway, we had some long, grueling days, and I thought what I had was a pulled groin muscle. Now, I don't know if anyone out there has ever pulled a groin muscle, but that is one of the least appreciated muscles in the body. I'm not a physical therapist, anything, a trainer, any of that, but sitting, walking, standing, shuffling, backpedaling, whatever, you name it. No, forget running. Just getting up from bed in the morning was painful. And I had this injury for a couple of days, and you're a freshman, you're trying to prove yourself. As invincible as I thought I was, I knew I needed to prove myself to my coaches. And long story short, I had to go to the training room, and they had me doing this exercise, a rehab exercise, where I would sit on this 3-wheeled stool, and I would have to shimmy myself across this massive training room. Now, once again, a college training room is way different than a high school training room. Instead of having like one student volunteer and maybe a trainer, we had 5 trainers, a doctor, and there's 100 people. It's 5:30 in the morning. It's loud music is playing. People are getting treatment, and part of the exercise was literally just dodging the people. And I guess it was supposed to strengthen the muscles around my hips and my groin to deal with my injury. Well, at one point, our head trainer, and this is a small guy, nice guy, but really small guy. For him to get everyone's attention, he would have to stand on like a box in the middle of the training room and scream at the top of his lungs. So you picture this guy, he's maybe 5'8", 140 pounds, soaking wet. And all of a sudden it got quiet. Now, I don't know if it actually got quiet on this day, but it never did, but it seemed like it that day. And he's yelling at me from across the training room. Bobby, they called me Bobby at the time. What are you doing still in the training room? You got to get back out on the field. You got to toughen up and get out there. And now when the trainer calls you out, that takes my 18-year-old guy's ego and kind of puts it in the tank, right? And it was kind of funny, but I said, we need to have a serious meeting. So we actually did. I think it was later that day. We sat down. He talked to me. I'm actually going to send you to a doctor if this is truly a problem, because this has been a week and this is just a mild groin pull. So I had every test in the book over a period of a couple of weeks. And you name it. I mean, and I'm an 18-year-old. I'm going to these appointments by myself and driving all over New York. Thankfully, I had a car, but it was like ultrasound, CAT scan,
Wow.
MRI, you name it, everything. And our first game was on a Saturday, a typical college football schedule. And my parents were coming up for this game on a Thursday afternoon. And I had an appointment. Now, most of my appointments, they took a while because they would prep me and they had to tell me what I'm doing. And I sign all these waivers. I'd be in these appointments for like an hour or longer to get these tests done. This one, I went in there on the day my parents were flying up there, and I expected it to be like, another hour-long thing, and my parents would be on their way to my uncle's house, which is where we were all going to meet. Well, the appointment was literally like 5 minutes long. He sat me down, and he goes, "Bobby, you have cancer." And I was like, "What? Where? How where did this come from?" And that was it. I mean, that was pretty much the whole conversation. And I was like, I was like ghost white face, right? I didn't even know what to think. I was in shock. And I walked out of the appointment with the doctor, and then my phone rings, and it was my mom. And she's like, "Hey, Bobby, how'd it go? How'd the appointment go?" And I'm like, "So, about the appointment, Mom." And I had to tell her, obviously I had to tell her that what the doctor said. And I told her, and I could hear my dad, who was in the car with her, like not on the phone, but on the other, in the other passenger seat. And he was like, "Susan," my mom's name is Susan. He's like, "What's going on? What's the problem?" He could tell something was wrong. And I could just tell that my mom, like all the air just was let out of the car that they were driving in. So we met back at my uncle's house, and we kind of looked at each other once again in shock, shed a few tears, said a few prayers, really didn't know what to do. And it was kind of a blur over the next couple of days. Now, Saturday came, and this was supposed to be the first game. Obviously, I wasn't playing in it, but instead of going to the game, we're all sitting around at my uncle's house, and my uncle's best friend came over the house. And I'll never forget this. Never met the guy before, because remember, we lived in Florida. They were from New York. He comes over the house, and he basically introduces himself to us, and immediately hands my parents his keys and says, "Bob, Susan, here's my keys. I can't imagine what you're going through with your son. Use my car for as long as you need it. Drive anywhere you need to go, and with all the doctor's appointments and whatever you have to do, have my car." And that was it. And he pretty much spent a couple of minutes, said hi to my uncle, the family, and now he was there for maybe 15 minutes. And he left. And that was the most generous thing that I had ever seen anyone ever do.
Wow,
so he leaves. And then a couple of days later, my oncologist had already told me, you can't drop out of your classes and do nothing. I'm not exactly sure the treatment that you're going to have, but you can't just do nothing and wallow in your sorrows. So I went to my first college class on Monday, went to a bunch more doctor's appointments. Tuesday morning comes, and this is key because I got out of my second ever college class. And I go to the cafeteria, and I'm going to eat a breakfast burrito. I'm sitting there eating it. Now, I don't know if you remember those tube televisions, and it's hanging from a bracket in the corner of the ceiling.
Yep.
And the news is on. Now, I've just moved to New York. I don't know the news channels. I don't watch any of the, television up there. But I'm watching the news, and all of a sudden a plane hits the Twin Towers.
No.
And I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. So I called my dad, and he's back at my uncle's house. I'm like, "Hey, you watching the news?" He goes, "Yeah. Did you see that?" I was like, "Yeah." And we were talking for like less than a minute. And then bam, another plane hits the other Twin Tower. And I'm like, what is going on in the world right now? So my dad said, "You better get it. You better come back to your uncle's house now." So I said, "All right, cool." So I don't even think I finished the burrito. I hightailed it out of there, hopped in the car. It would typically take me 15 minutes to get to my uncle's house from school. It took me 9 hours. And I've since have achieved a master's degree in broadcast journalism. I worked in radio for a couple of years. I will never, ever listen to 9 straight hours of AM radio again.
I love it.
But it was riveting because I'm listening to this. In the distance in my car, I can see burning towers like way in the background. I'm in New York. And I pulled into my uncle's neighborhood, ran out of gas in the neighborhood, and we pushed my car into his driveway. And we're all looking at each other like, I cannot believe this is even happening. And we couldn't get a hold of my uncle though. My aunt is hysterical. It's like 7 o'clock at night, whatever it is at this point. And finally he calls and he says, guys, I'm okay. I know what happened. I'm stuck in Denver. I was on business. I can't get a flight right now. But just know that, I'm fine. I'm safe. I'll try to get home tomorrow. But Tim was in the towers that morning and he died. And we were like, oh my goodness, here's this guy who did the most generous thing I've ever seen in my life. And he lost his life in the towers. Now, he worked for an organization called Cantor Fitzgerald. They're an investment bank.
Right.
And all of their everyone who worked in that tower that morning, they would get into the office investment banker 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. So they were gone. And they would donate office space to my uncle's foundation that supports research and awareness for cystic fibrosis. And they only had one employee that would typically be in that early, but she got stuck. She was late, uncharacteristically late, stuck in the subway that morning and thankfully escaped. But the stories that she can tell and my family and all the things that happened in that 4 or 5 day period was just unbelievable, Karen. I cannot believe it. So I tell you that whole story because that period of time in my life, I still thought in some crazy way that I was this invincible 18-year-old. And I did everything that my doctor told me to do. I mean, I drank the amount, it's not even exaggeration. The amount of water I was supposed to drink to the ounce. I went to bed and woke up at the exact times I was supposed to. I slept the exact amount of hours. I ate the food that I was supposed to eat, didn't eat the food that I was not supposed to eat. I was determined to be the best cancer patient known to man. And thankfully, over about 5 or 6 months, no, it's even more like 4 or 5 months, I was healed. The doctor told me that if what I had, which was testicular cancer, which you may have deduced by the groin injury, spread up to my abdomen. And the doctor's like, this is extremely aggressive. Like if you wouldn't have found this, I'm not sure how long you would have lasted, but it's also extremely curable. So he hit me really hard with an incredibly intensive chemotherapy treatment sessions. And by December, he didn't scam me at all during that period of time. I was just grinding. I mean, I basically turned it into, it was like, instead of, I'm not going to be a college football player and work out and train really, really hard and spend time in the film room and dedicated my life to sports. I'm going to dedicate my life to this. And which was good for me at the time, I believe, because of my mindset. It kept me positive that I was going to beat this thing. And I felt resilient. And I was healed physically in 4 months. I'd say in probably 6 months or so, I kind of got back into my groove and I felt a little bit more in control of my life. But it took years. It took years for the emotions to kind of calm down and for me to understand them in my mind. And so the emotional part of it was extremely draining and I didn't even realize it. And so when you talk about resilience and the ways and the things that need to be done in order to cope with major illness, I don't have the perfect answer that can help you understand it right away, but I needed to think a little bit more deeply about the forces in my life that were there to help me get through that, because it wasn't just me. To be honest with you, I don't know how important drinking the exact 124 ounces of water every day exactly. I don't know if that was that important. I knew to drink a lot of water was important, but it wasn't necessarily just me who beat the cancer. It was my doctor. It was the nurses that helped me. It was the medications. I have another story about I mentioned my uncle has a foundation for cystic fibrosis. So that's because my cousin, his son has that. And I asked a couple of different stories, maybe for another time, that I could share about how that relationship that I built with my cousin when he was going through his worst times with his disease were really, really helpful and healthy for me as well. And then I also have another story about how my wife, who I didn't even know at the time, was supporting me when we didn't even know it. So there are just other forces in life that we may not even realize that are there for us. And part of resilience is being able to embrace those forces and not try to take it all on by yourself.
Oh, what a story. I mean, as you were telling the story and then you went into 9/11, I know how devastating that was for my family. I had a son working in the area as an attorney. And
Mhm.
as I knew, he very frequently was at the towers. So my
Mhm.
assumption automatically was, oh my God, he's at the towers. Um,
Mhm.
my brother is a music producer, and I knew they were doing a concert in Battery Park that night, the night before.
Oh,
And I kept thinking,
wow.
I wonder where he's staying. I wonder if he's part of it. And I was very lucky. My son overslept that morning, so he was nowhere near the towers. My brother, they had wrapped everything up very late in the morning, but he got away from the area before this all
Mm.
happened. But when you don't know, uh, it's almost like a cancer that hits your body. You feel like you're
Mhm.
never going to recover. Um, and it wasn't until hours later when we got the phone calls from my son and my brother that we knew that they were safe. But that still wasn't good enough, you know, because
Mhm.
all those other people that suffered. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that sometimes that's the way we feel when a relative, a friend gets a medical diagnosis that doctors may say, hey, this is, if you're going to get it, this is the best one to get because we can cure it. But you and family are still in shock. Like you said, you
Mhm.
were an athlete. Athletes shouldn't get these things, okay? Because you're taking care of your body. You're
Mhm.
have the right mindset. But the reality of it is, as we go down this path every single day, there are twists and turns. And if we make the wrong twist or turn, something might happen that we had we didn't create. It got created for us. And
Mhm.
and as I listened to your story, um, a young boy wanting to be an athlete, being told he had cancer and wasn't going to be an athlete anymore, I can see so many young people saying, then what's in my life? So, what did you see that's made you drink the water, do the things you had to do, stay in school like the doctor recommended, so that you
Mhm.
could get a clean bill of health?
I've always been a competitive person, and there's some strange way I turned it into my competition, and that's the only thing that's the only way I can describe it, at least in my mindset at the time. Now, like I said, I think about it a lot differently now. But that was really the only way I could do it. It was, I'm going to be the best cancer patient. You know, like social media wasn't around back then,
Right.
but I feel like I would have been the person. Probably, I don't know, maybe I would have been the annoying cancer patient on Instagram, posting about how good my treatment went or how tough it was, or it was about powering through, and which I think is a strong factor in productivity these days. I think there's so many distractions in the world, so it's good to have that trait. Don't get me wrong. I'm not one of these people who thinks that we should be working. Everyone should be working 2-day weeks. I think we should work hard for something great in the world. My parents always told me to fight for something, and at that point, I was fighting for my life, and it was a fight. I took it like a fight. I mean, when I would get when they would stick the needles in me to have chemotherapy treatment and all the other drugs that they had to put in me to help my white blood cell count, I had to give myself shots. Every single one of those was another play on the football field, to be honest with you. And that was good for me at the time to get through. But when we talk about resilience, I think there's certain things in life that, um, that you want to have that mindset and that resiliency, but you also got to be aware of your surroundings and the other things that you got to lean on other things. And that's like my message these days. That's why generosity is so important to me, because I think we're all inherently built to support other people, right? I mean, I think it's the human mind. There's TED Talks and research about this. I had a lady by the name of Wendy Steele who founded an organization called Impact 100 Global. You can check out their work. It's tremendous work that they do, bringing women together to be charitable. But she has a TED Talk. It's probably 10 years old now, but she talks about how generosity is contagious, and it's been proven. So if you've heard of the hormone oxytocin,
Right.
any moms who have people who have given birth before, they know the feeling, what oxytocin brings. But it's beyond just birth, but it's known as the bonding hormone because it's involved in a lot of things. But one of the main things that humans report and research has shown is that there's a bond between people, and oxytocin is distributed by the body. It's excreted when those close, the feeling of closeness is there. And so what Wendy talks about in her TED Talk is fascinating to me. So most people can generally understand that if you receive a gift, whether it's monetary or it's time or just a hug or someone opens the door for you, it feels good. You might feel some oxytocin there. You might even feel some dopamine, which is another hormone that can go off on a whole other tangent on that. But specifically oxytocin, that appreciation, and there's a bond with that person who gave something to you, whether it's small or very, very deep. Now, the next step is also pretty easy to understand. Most people understand that when you give something, you also experience oxytocin. There's a bond between you and the person that you've given to. If anyone out there has been generous before, you know what I'm talking about. But what most people don't realize is that third parties can also experience oxytocin. So if I'm just an onlooker and I watch someone perform a generous act to someone else, I also feel good.
Oh, absolutely.
It makes me feel good, right? So generosity is such an important part of this process and those bonds that we have between people. And that's why it's so important to me, because I know there's other forces in my life that are there. And it wasn't just good for me, for them to help me. Like I mentioned, the relationship I built with my cousin. We did some very generous things for each other during those few months. It was good for both of us. My parents, and now come to find out after having conversations with my cousin 20 years later about what we've learned from our parents about that time, they felt so much joy seeing the two of us bonding with each other. So it's just so important to lean on other people, and it's a two. Well, I've actually just proven it's a three-way street or four-way. However many people are watching, it's so important.
You know, it's interesting that you bring this science up. On the evening news, specifically on ABC, at the end, they always have a feel-good story, no matter how terrible things are in the world. Okay, there's that little feel-good story. And my youngest son, who is a young adult, rarely is sitting at the table with us when my husband and I are eating dinner. But when he is, and these feel-good stories come on, the first thing he looks at his dad and he says, "This is a baby deer," because my husband chokes up and tears up over most of these stories. And, you know, that makes me feel even closer to my husband, knowing that he has this feeling that, you know, things are meaningful, you know. And my son moved out about a month ago, and the other night we were sitting watching the news, and one of these stories came up, and for the first time I was tearing up. And the two of us like looked at each other and we said, you know, are we tearing up because this is a feel-good story, or are we tearing up because there were all these bad stories? And I said, it doesn't make any difference. Okay. What we're feeling is a positive feeling. We knew that if we could walk outside and share it with somebody, that would be a gift. So I totally understand what you're saying. And yet we're going to have some listeners sitting there going, yeah, no, that doesn't work. But it does. It certainly does. So
I agree.
You mentioned that your wife was supporting you even before you met her. What did you mean by that?
So this was a kind of a blow your mind type of story, actually. So my wife and I actually met through a mission organization. Believe it or not, the first time, you mentioned being from Ohio, the first time I ever participated in this organization, I was on a trip in the summer of 1999, and it was in Ohio. And I was touring around on a bike I went all around Ohio. So it was pretty cool. Fast forward a few years later, in 2003, I was in Michigan, where my wife is actually from. And I was doing the same trip with some people I knew, a lot of people I didn't, and just, you know, building some bonds and meeting some really, really cool people. And a friend of ours who was on our trip was on the previous trip with my wife. Now, not my wife at the time.
Right.
She was she must have been in high school. And so we actually met each other. And 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 it's a funny story. The story goes, I actually spent more time talking with her best friend who was there that night. But I mean, this wasn't like a love interest type of thing, but we
Right.
joke about it all the time. So anyway, well, that was it. It was like, hi, nice to meet you, whatever. 2 years later, we were on the same trip. And this time it was in Virginia. And I was like, hey, I recognize you. And we kind of like one thing led to another. We kind of figured out, how we knew each other. And a group of five of us actually became tremendously good friends and we kept in touch and would talk all the time. And me and my wife, her name is Trisha, talked more than probably all of them. And we eventually started this long distance dating relationship. And a long distance relationship is a unique thing.
Right.
And I'm not here to give relationship advice, but I do have quite a bit of experience with long distance relationships. So anyway, we became really, really good friends. And then one night, somewhere along the lines, we were having this conversation, and it might have been a year plus later. We were a lot more serious, and it was late at night. It might have been 3 a.m. for all I know. And we're having the conversation, and I was telling her, and she knew that I went through cancer a couple of years before that, and that's when I was a freshman in college, and I was telling her a little bit more about it, and she was like, yeah, it's really interesting. So she was like, well, when I was a junior in high school, I had this teacher at my school, and everyone liked this guy. And the first day of class, he kind of stood in front of the class and he said, class, we're going to try something new this year. What we're going to do is periodically throughout the year, we're going to pray for our future spouses. And like you're like a 16-year-old girl or whatever, or a guy for that matter, and like like a teacher says, well, let's pray for our spouses. Like you're probably looking at them like, that's nuts. Like I'm not even thinking about
Right.
getting married. Why would I even do that? So anyway, they went about their business, and throughout the fall semester that year, they would do that. They would periodically pray for their husband. And so we did the math, and we're talking about this, and she's 2 years younger than me. So when we figured it out, well, I was going through my treatments, and all of that story was just happening in the fall of 2001. She was a junior in high school. So throughout that period of time, she didn't know who I was, had no idea anything was going on with me. She was supporting me prayerfully while I was going through that period of the hardest period of my life. So it was like,
Wow, interesting.
yeah.
Well, they say we live in a very small world. We are interconnected. And as I'm
Mhm,
listening to your story, um, you took that bike ride here in Ohio, where I am,
mhm.
and your wife is from Michigan, and so am I. And so
Wow.
when you talk about these things, and it goes beyond just even your story. So many of
Mhm,
us, like I said, we wake up in the morning, we really think we know who we are, where we're going, what's going to happen. And if our day doesn't go that way, well, there must be something wrong with me because everybody else is having a perfect day. But the
mhm,
reality of it is that nobody is having a perfect day. I don't even know what perfect is anymore. And I don't even think I care. Um, but as we meet each other, we find these little things that connect us. And what I hope from this podcast is that more and more people are going to hear your voice and the voices of my other guests and realize, you know what? I don't have to like everything that somebody says. I don't have to like everything about them. But what's wrong with being compassionate for each other? Let's be there. Let's, because none of us know what's going to happen in the next minute, you know?
mhm.
Um, and like you said, when you were, you know, watching TV in the cafeteria, would you ever have expected that that's what you were going to see on the TV? It certainly wasn't the way I expected. That same morning, I had just turned on the TV in our bedroom, and all of a sudden, I saw the first plane. And the first thing I said to my husband was, did I see that? And he was sort
Mhm,
of behind me watching it. And he goes, that couldn't have happened. And then not too long after that, we saw the second plane. And all I could think of was I had to get to my son's school. Now I'm in Ohio. I'm not in New York. I'm nowhere
yeah.
near any of it. But I knew I had to get there. I had to see my son. And so that day brought us all together and so
Mhm.
many other things. Your cancer, I'm sure, created a different bond between you and your parents. Even if it was great before, it probably was
Mhm.
so much stronger afterwards. Am I
Mhm.
right or wrong?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I'm an only child. I like to joke that I think my parents gave up after me. They said, "All right, that's enough. We've had one. He's plenty." And I was a busy kid. I wasn't a bad kid. My parents never described me as a bad kid, but I was a busy kid. I loved to move around. I was constantly on the run and on the go. So I probably was a little tiring, but they loved me. And even throughout my, adolescent years, they were always at my sporting events, so my academic events, extracurricular activities. I mean, just about anything that they could afford, which wasn't a lot. I mean, my parents were very, very hardworking people, but I had everything I could possibly need, enough to entertain myself, places to go. I was supported very, very well. But you're absolutely right. There was a different bond with them after my illness, because I think for much of my, until I was 18, it was, how can I give my son everything he possibly needs to be successful in the world, because I believe strongly in him that he's got something to do. And they always encouraged me to fight for something. So I think they wanted me to put me in best position to do that. Once the fight was identified, at least at that period of time, as fighting for my life, I think it was, okay, now it's no longer about putting him in the best position. There's nothing else they could do at that point. They had to kind of leave it up to the doctors and just take care of me. And, they felt a less of a burden to put me in a good situation, and more now just to keep me comfortable as much as possible. And I think going back to what I alluded to before about putting me in a situation where me and my cousin could build this bond, I think they knew that helping me at that point was not slaving over me and being the helicopter parents. It was kind of just letting me like breathe a little bit, like give me some mental distraction. So to answer your question, yes, absolutely. And so now our bond after that period of time, I think for those couple of years that I was kind of figuring out the emotions, and then maybe even for a couple of years after that, I think my relationship with the parents was, they were just like thankful that I was alive, and
Yeah.
they just wanted to be near me and be around me. And even though I was a young adult and going to get married eventually, like up until around the time I got married, I think that's kind of what it was like. And then when I got married in 2007, so 6 years after my treatments, then I think now they started to realize, they felt a little bit more comfortable that I was going to live a normal life.
Right.
And then it became, we want to support him. And we're just really, really proud that he came through all of that.
Absolutely. So you've told us where you've come from.
Mhm.
So what are you doing now? What makes Bob the best version of himself today?
Well, that whole story, all of that we've talked about, is definitely part of it. I think people have asked me before, do you have regrets, or would you do it again? And I would never wish the treatments and what I had to go through on anyone. So no, I don't think I'd want to go through the physical struggles again. But I wouldn't change what's happened as a result of it, right? So essentially, I wouldn't change it back. So very, very important part, on helping me shape the future of my life. And so I've mentioned before about generosity, how important that is to me. So it always stuck in my mind what Tim O'Brien did for my family. He was, I don't know if he was thinking like this, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was like, you know what, I don't know how much life I have left. I may die 4 days from now in a terrible terrorist attack. That's probably weren't his thoughts, but he was the type of guy, I could just tell. My uncle has told me stories about him since then, that he is the type of guy that would participate in what you would call radical generosity. And radical generosity is something that leads my mindset right now in my life, because I think generosity is one thing, and this is a bit of a challenge. I'm starting to challenge people on this. It's easy to be generous when you're supposed to be generous, when everyone else is. It's easy to volunteer when you have a group of 50 people that basically force you to go, or it's easy to write a check occasionally. But what's not easy is doing stuff that people would otherwise think is crazy. Like, if you're borderline, if something you're going to do out of generosity is kind of borderline, are people going to think I'm nuts? That, in most cases, I would encourage you to do it. I would say that that's a good thing. That's radical generosity. And that's what's going to make the world a better place. And that's going to create positive impact in the world. So in my professional life, I did work in radio for a couple of years out of grad school. And I really liked it, but I ended up getting recruited into the financial industry. And so I believe that everyone has gifts and skills that can help make the world a better place, and that
Right.
you can either do professionally or you can do on a volunteer basis. You can apply radical generosity, but everyone has that. Like your skills of hosting a radio show. Someone else might be artistic and they might draw, create physical art. Someone might be your son. I think you said it was your brother who's a musician. Like
Right.
there's all different ways that we can make the world a better place. Everyone has that. And so if that's truly the case, then I believe that my skills are in the communication and in kind of displaying complicated topics for people in the financial space in a simple way. And so my business partner and I, in the past year, left the company that we work for, opened our own firm, and our focus is working with generous people.
Love that.
We want to help generous people live out and be as generous as they possibly can. So we kind of tackle all of some of those technical things that can get super complicated from a financial perspective for people, simplify that so they can spend more time on the causes that they care most about.
Oh, how wonderful. And I think something that we've all learned in the last couple of years since the pandemic, um, it's time to reinvent ourselves to be authentic.
Mm,
Do what you feel good about. For many years in corporate America, we would take these assessments, and it always came out that I was a pleaser. And I thought, well, yeah,
mhm,
that's my mother taught me, my father taught me, please everybody. And I would sit there afterwards so upset with myself because the more I was pleasing people, the less I was pleasing myself. But I
mhm,
found out when I left corporate America, it was I wasn't I wasn't mindful of my pleasing. And
mm,
that was the difference. Once I became mindful, it was like very easy, very comfortable for me to do the things that helped other people. And like you said in the
mhm,
beginning, it may have just been opening a door. It may have been talking to somebody in the grocery store who looked lonely. It may be when
mhm,
I've gone to a doctor's visit and there's somebody who's sitting there who's alone and maybe looks frail. Starting a conversation. And because we never know what anyone else is going through. And
mhm.
that's why it's amazing what you and your partner have started. So tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you.
Yes. So I would recommend two ways. If you really want to learn a lot about the work that we're doing with generosity and helping families live out their generosity, you can go to initiateimpact.com. That's our company site. You can learn all the information there. If you want to connect with me directly, and I always encourage it, I love to communicate with people. You can go to my website, bobdepasquale.com. And my social links are all on there. It's mostly at BDEPA, BDEPA. And I answer DMs, connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, any of those things. I love having these conversations. So thank you so much, Karen, for facilitating this. I love your questions. And yeah, people can get in touch with me any one of those ways.
Well, that is absolutely wonderful. And again, I want to remind people that generosity, we always seem to connect it with the almighty dollar. And that dollar is important, don't get me wrong. But if we can be generous with our time, with our
Mhm.
gratitude, um, we'll be helping so many more people than we ever thought we would. So, Bob, thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. At least it's beautiful here in Cleveland. Um, and my father once taught me, even if it's cloudy and raining, on the other side of the clouds, the sun is shining. So look that
It's
way.
coming. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, have a
Love
great
it.
day and thanks again.
Thanks, Karen.
Bye bye now.
Bye.